You're a little ahead of me just in terms of kids, high school. My oldest is a freshman. And every kid is different. So really how you navigate the situation and even on some sense the rules you set are going to vary depending on the child and the maturity. I don't know if you get this all the time, but I have parents all the time saying, oh, they said you look great, Carrie.
Thank
So
you.
she does. She really does. Um, I have parents saying all the time, it has to be fair. You know, what I do for one, I have to do for the other. But when the kids are different, we're going to parent differently because you may be doing your child a disservice parenting the way you did one child, right? When their needs are different.
Mhm.
So you can't always be fair when you're having different kids. You have to tailor your parenting to that child and their needs.
Absolutely, but it's hard, right? It's
So
hard. My
hard.
kids are really close in age, but far enough apart where the rules need to be different. My youngest is 13, my oldest is almost 17, and I'm tired, right? So sometimes it's just, you just want to say one rule, one size fits all. But what's appropriate for the 16-and-a-half-year-old is certainly not appropriate for the 13-year-old, and they're different kids.
Yep.
So I think before we get into questions or talking about this, it starts with show yourself some grace, moms,
Mm.
and dads and parents who are out there watching. Show yourself some grace. We're navigating this as we go. I often think of my relationship with my oldest and like, whew, it's like trial and error because I've never done this before. And so she and I were talking yesterday, and you called me when she and I were talking, and I was talking to her about this, about what we were doing tonight. And she reminded me to say that to everyone, like, be kind to yourself because it's not easy. So that is like
You
point
did a
number
good
one.
job with her because if that was what her response was, and not only that, we are navigating probably one of the hardest eras in terms of parenting, and
Mm-hmm.
and so much of it has to do with screens and their connection to their peers all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and what that's doing to their brains, what it's doing to their self perception and self esteem. So there's a lot to unpack here. But should we just jump right into questions?
Let's jump right in.
Okay. I have a list of questions that people submitted. And one that I'm getting a lot is social media use for kids and phones. And there are kids who are getting phones at a younger and younger age. I mean, when my oldest Natalia, who's 15, was in the 5th grade, almost no one had a phone. And now with Sophia, who's 10, is in 5th grade, there are a lot of kids who have phones. And yes, there's a convenience factor for the parents. You know, the kids are playing sports like sometimes 30 minutes away, but we have to realize what goes with that. And one thing that I and my husband talked about when we were getting the kids phones are we ready for that responsibility? Are we ready to start monitoring? And not to say that we're all in their business all the time, but especially when you're talking about a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old who's just navigating the social piece of
Mm-hmm.
social media. As a parent, you have to be ready to kind of become another partner in that,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of setting limits and actually seeing how they're communicating with other kids, because there's a ton of drama that originates from that, from those platforms there. Would love to hear your thoughts on navigating, when do kids get phones? When can they be on social media? What do we have to think about as parents when we're
Mm-hmm.
allowing that?
So again, back to the beginning of what we talked about just a minute ago, it's not one size fits all. And I don't believe that for a second. I think we have to know our children. We have to know why we're allowing them to have, let's take the phone first, before we even take the social media apps that go on the phone. Let's take the phone and texting first and phone calls. Knowing our kids, knowing the why behind why they're asking for it. If they're asking for it because everybody else has it, they're asking for it because they feel responsible enough and they want to be able to communicate with their friends. Okay. But then setting some ground rules. I've done this with my kids. I've encouraged clients to do this. Set some ground rules, but also these are ground rules that are written in sand, not cement. And when they're written in
Mm.
sand, it means we can change them. We can change them based on behavior. We can change them based on circumstance. We can change them based on grades, based on a whole bunch of things. It's not in cement where it's like, this is the rule for forever. And that has helped in terms of teaching and working with my own kids and working with friends and clients in terms of navigating when to do a phone. The one thing that I say often, and this is for the tweens and the teens, is somebody just asked me, a client just asked me, at what age can they have their phone in their room overnight? Period. Dot, dot, dot. And I was like, definitely an individual choice. It's definitely, there is no law. However, let's talk about what could happen if they're going to be on their phone at night. Number one, they're not sleeping. What happens when your teenager's not sleeping? They're not rested. They're not prepared for school. They're a little snarky the next day. They're a little cranky the next day. So let's write some boundaries. Let's draw some boundaries in the sand, saying this is where we're starting. We're navigating this with you. But at any given time, we're going to communicate. We could change this boundary. We could give you more access to it, less access to it. I think it really depends.
So one thing, and honestly, I don't think, I mean, here's my rigid boundary for you. You can psychoanalyze me however you want. I don't think anyone needs phones in their room at night, and especially kids, because kids will communicate with them at all hours. Like you said, it does affect their sleep. And I've seen so many kids. Hold on, I want to just get that question before it disappears. I have a question from the other side. My kids 13, 12, and 10 do not have phones. Is that detrimental, and that they have very limited contact with their friends outside of school hours? That's a great question. We're going to get back to that one.
And there was one right above it. How do you
I
say
got that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
you got that one? Okay.
Yeah, I got that one. So one, yes, as Mandy said, it is a distraction, but when they hear notifications on their phones, if they have notifications, that triggers a dopamine release. So when we're talking about addiction, we're talking about a series. I wrote about all of this in my book and social media. There's a whole section on social media and what it's doing in terms of changing our neurochemistry and what we're responsive to. So this goes far beyond communicating with their kids. If we don't have those limitations, we are enabling them to develop an addiction. And unfortunately, I mean, I know I'm tired. I don't have time to patrol and police these phones all the time. Sometimes our kids have them in their room. Sometimes they don't. When I remember, we're trying to get them out of the room. They've used the excuse, oh, my alarm is on the phone. We bought them alarm clocks because of this reason. It is the constant connection to the phone. And just like how when we haven't checked our phone in a while, feel this need to go. Think about their brains are developing. They have not known anything else. So they're developing around these behaviors and solidifying those behaviors at a faster and stronger rate than we can because their brains are more neuroplastic.
That's
So,
right.
And also when kids have phones, we have to think about at their age, how good are they at setting the boundary? How you're asking a 12-year-old to set a boundary on their phone, all night. What we do, yes, I like that. I've heard to say not to give your kids a phone, but say, this is my phone you can use. I make the rules.
Yep.
So when you take it away, there's a sense of entitlement. I like that. I like that idea.
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to have a conversation about the rules and give them some ownership of the rules in terms of saying, okay, what do you think is healthy? What are time limits that you think are healthy? Now, at the end of the day, I might not agree as a parent, but we want to get them involved in that conversation and also teach them how they can be responsible about the phone and why these rules are for their benefit. Because if we're always going to approach it from that authoritarian stance of this is my rule and this is what I'm going to do, that has potential, one, to foster resentment and also for kids to oppose it just because developmentally they're in that phase of developing their own identity, individuating and separating from parents. So we need them to buy into it too. I'm talking way too much. Speak.
No. You were right on the money. And I think also, yes, their brains are still developing. Yes, we have to to go in and help firm up those boundaries. But if we can lead by example, because the fact of the matter is, we don't need our phones in our room overnight either. The fact of the matter is, there are plenty of times, especially during COVID, when I had significant trouble sleeping for a variety of reasons, and the first thing I would do is like reach over, look at my phone. Would love to tell you that I was reading the Bible app, but I was not doing that. I was scrolling social media. And that was a conviction to me, that where I actually went to my three and said, I'm going to put my phone downstairs too, because I'm not getting good sleep. And that helped. Like, there was an audible exhale with my two older ones, like, all right, well, mom's doing it, so I guess it might, all right, we'll try it. That's powerful when
It
parents
is.
can lead by example and say, this is going to be a family. We don't use rule, we use guideline, because rules are, it seems punitive to me. So here's the family guideline. All of our phones are downstairs, or all of our phones are in. I have one client who puts their phones in the safe. They lock them up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is but we're all doing it. So it's not one separate rule for you and one separate for mom and dad. And that has been proven to be very helpful.
I think that's great with the modeling. And also, so let's just go to those questions. 18-year-old full-blown phone addict, how do you help her? That's a tough question, because you're dealing with an adult now, an 18, and there is that need for the phone. And I would say first, to engage in a conversation and say, okay, tell me what do you get out of having your phone with you all the time? Why do you need it? Do you like that? Do you like that feeling of having to check all the time? Would you be willing to at least try 24 hours or 48 hours without the phone, just to see how you feel? Or maybe let's reduce the time to see how you feel. And you can present her with the information on why it's not healthy for her all the time. It impacts our mood. Kids see things in a minute and they're triggered by it. And that's when you're thinking about younger kids having the phone. Are they emotionally ready? When something bad happens with friend groups or school, are they emotionally able to regulate themselves, or is it a setback for days? Because that is much more likely to happen when they have access to communication all day long. And that can happen with an iPad. That can happen with an iPod. If kids have an iPod or iPad, those same conversations go along with it. I've monitored so many conversations on my kids' iPods that I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on here?
Yes, I see Melly's comment. Yeah, let me just before we get to her comment, the mama of the 18-year-old, because that is an adult. You used the word addiction, and I take that word very seriously. So when I think of addictions that we treat in practice all the time, drugs, sex, food, alcohol, there's typically need for an intervention by a third party. So I would say to you, is there a level of support you can provide your 18-year-old that he or she would be willing to receive? Hey, we can go to counseling together. Hey, let's do this self-help group together. Let's go from 24 hours on the phone to 23 hours to, how do we do today? Holding each other accountable, because if it is truly an addiction, just putting in a boundary is not going to work. There needs to be boundaries, accountability, and support.
That's so good. And also, sometimes what I do with my kids is say, let's look at, and I'm transparent too, because they're always like, Mama, get off your phone. Mama, get off your phone. I'm like, I'm working on my phone, not just going, but let's look at where our time went on our phone. How much time are we spending on each of these apps? What are we doing? And sometimes when we show them that, they get embarrassed. They're like, they have no idea they've spent this much time.
Right.
Time limit apps for the phone are good. But we asked the conversation, okay, what else could you do with that time? What else would you want to do with that time other than spending it on TikTok or whatever it is? TikTok was a question that a lot of moms had asked me about, because kids tend to get on TikTok somewhat at a younger age. And I just want to put this out there. There's a lot that kids are going to see on TikTok, even amongst their own peers. I'm going to be very honest that, like, recently I heard of a situation where fifth graders were talking about dick pics on TikTok. We're talking about 10-year-olds,
Wow.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So unless you're ready to be able to monitor that, especially at young ages, you have to think, okay, not only are they ready, but am I ready for that additional responsibility in their life? I think the longer you can hold off on these things, the better. But we'll talk about that other question as well. Personally, I did not allow my kids social media till they were 13. Like, that was the right decision for our family. And I also have 4 kids, so I know that age is going to get creepingly younger by the 4th child.
Right.
But it seemed like a good place to start, but also with maturity at that age, to be able to handle it. And, you know, that was right for my first kid and the second, and we'll see where we're at with the third. So the question was for kids who have not been allowed phones or social media. And there's a difference between having a phone versus being on social media. You know, so you can have a phone or an iPad or iPod, and still be able to text, still be able to communicate. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on social media. And I think, you know, one may happen. It's advantageous to have one before the other. So the one lady asked about her kids who don't have phones. Are they at a disadvantage? And there have been other questions that come in about that, about parents not allowing social media at all. So let's talk about the two. Yep, Irene says our youngest got Snapchat at 13, but we turn all apps off at a certain hour. Yeah, boundaries.
That's great. That's great. We do the same thing actually with Snapchat. So with the internet, we turn it off. To the woman who says her children do not have phones or apps, and are they at a disadvantage? So that really kind of helps us pivot into the fullness of this conversation in terms of navigating friendships. In the world with which we live, where the majority of kids have social media, have phones, have technology, kudos to you, Mom, for not allowing your kids to have it. No judgment here. If that is right for your children, that is great. They will probably come up against questions, maybe criticism, maybe judgment. So that conversation starts at home. This is why you don't have it. This is what our conviction is. This is, and having the conversation, what to say when your friend looks at you like you have 3 heads because you don't have social media or a phone. So I think being transparent with your kids and saying, this is the boundary we've set. We're not ready. We don't believe in, we don't want you to have, whatever the reason is. But knowing that once they step foot out of your house and they enter into the world, they're going to be with peers who likely do have it. So prepare them for that conversation.
I will bring up, I think that's great. You have to have the conversation, and also at a certain point recognize, because I know parents who have kids in high school who have not allowed them social media either, you know, and if the kids are on board with it, if there's not resistance about it, especially at the older ages, okay. But if there is, we also have to get them ready to be able to make good decisions on their own, including setting boundaries and setting limits. We're not always going to be there to do that for them. So we have to learn to empower them to do it for themselves. Right. So if it's starting to cause a lot of resistance, and you are going to eventually have a relationship that is kind of riddled with resentment, you have to think, is that boundary worth it now at this stage? So to be able to have those conversations and say, you know, how are you feeling about this? What has it been like for you? Not having the phone, not having social media. What are other ways you're finding to connect with your friends? Can I help you with that? Because kids do connect with other kids through the phone. So I will say, I have seen many situations where kids have felt left out. They have not been included because they don't have that ability to communicate. Now, some have been able to communicate on an iPod. So, you know, maybe, or an iPad, so maybe they didn't need the phone. But there was one situation when I was working with a client that really made me, and this was before my kids had phones, that made me think twice. And her daughter was in town with a girl. That girl was engaging in behavior that her daughter was not comfortable with. And she did not have a phone. She was relying on that girl's phone and she felt uncomfortable to ask the girl to call her mom to pick her up because she didn't have a phone. And that really made me think about, okay, there could be benefits for that child having a phone if we're ready to set that boundary. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if they don't have a phone and they're in this situation or at, you know, whatever it might be, and maybe that's not a common situation, but it did make me think in
Sure.
terms of giving them that ability to be a little bit more independent and autonomous in making their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, because we are more and more letting our kids be independent and go out into town in your case. So that is a really good point. That is, but you said something, which it's for me, it's like rule number one when talking to parents is be a good listener.
Mm.
Listen to your kids, understand why they want a phone, what or not, why, you know, if we talk about the friendship drama, what's going on before we react. And I have been a huge reactor as a parent, huge reactor. But before we react, and no, you can't have a phone. You're too young. You don't need social media. I don't believe in that. That's it. Whatever. Listen. And
Mm.
so I have this little 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that I do in my head. I count and I bite my tongue. I'm surprised I have a tongue in my mouth before I speak. I just listen. And that has really proven to be especially valuable with my youngest, because she's the youngest of 3, always feels like she's in the shadow of her older siblings, and just listen. And I'm always amazed with what comes out of her mouth. Like, no, mom, I don't want XYZ. I just want you to understand why all my friends have it, or why, you know, fill in the blank. So listen, we need to do, as parents, and I'm talking to myself, we need to do a better job of listening to our kids.
Yeah, and hearing their reasoning behind it, you
Yes.
know, what they want. And sometimes you have to kind of pick your battles. There might be a time where, okay, I don't like this, but I can see this impacting the child in a negative way. There could be benefits to this.
Mm-hmm.
She said she loves the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I like that too.
Mm.
I need to implement that too, Carrie,
Don't
sometime.
bite your tongue. I don't want to be responsible for somebody hurting themselves, but yes.
um, but I think that listening and even thinking for yourself, what is behind what they're saying as well? You know, what is the motivation for them to say this and to ask this? But it is a tough world to navigate. We're going to talk about the different types of reactions of parents when there is drama with their child, because there's this book is great. It's
Yes, that
Queen
is great.
Bees, Wannabes. The male version is Masterminds and Wingmen. And the other one that's been helpful for younger kids is Little Girls Can Be Mean. And that is true. Girl stuff, drama, whatever you want to call it, starts really young. I've observed it even in kindergarten, where little girls assess the social value of each other and determine the hierarchy in kindergarten, who they're going to play with, who they're going to sit next to. I've seen it right in front of my eyes in volunteering at schools. So, but let's get to some of the other questions. The other thing, just on that social media use, is what if your child doesn't have it, and then other kids are making fun of that kid, calling that child a baby?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
would you do,
Which
therapist
is
Carrie? By the
therapist.
way, I'm walking to the bathtub to get my child out of the bathtub, who's been
There
in
it is.
there for like hours. Come out. Great. Go ahead.
So for the kids that don't have it and are being made fun of, we need to have that conversation with the kids before we even decide if they're going to have social media or not. So I see that one of my um, daughter's friends is watching right now, and their family and our family are besties, and she and some of their other friends have had Snapchat for many, 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 many months. And when my daughter turned 13, that was like the age. And I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for a whole host of reasons. The main one being I didn't understand it and I didn't know how to use it. And so we waited and waited. But what I said to my daughter, again, 13, so we can talk about how to have this conversation with a 7 or 8-year-old, was, you know, she had you said 13, and I did. So I had to
Mm,
apologize and say, you know what, I thought I was going to be ready for this on your 13th birthday, and I'm not, and here's why. And right around the time she turned 13, there was the son of a famous radio personality who purchased drugs on Snapchat, overdosed, and died. And it just, I couldn't wrap my head around, how do I work with her on this? How do I explain this to her? So I said, let's just wait, because I'm feeling uncomfortable. But we have a norm in our family where we talk about everything. And so it wasn't odd to her that it wasn't like I just said no and like, get out of my face. I said, I'm uncomfortable. And so why am I uncomfortable? Why, with what happened to that young man, why do I think, like, what, she was like, that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to buy drugs. I know. And I'm sure he told his mother the same thing. Let me work through what the boundaries can be. How do we protect you from that? All of that. So I said, and if your friends say, what's the matter? We all have it. Let's role play. We do a lot of role playing in this house. What can you say? You can, when they were young, I would tell
give them the words, right?
give them the
Help
words.
them come up with the responses before it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so my youngest has well, all of my kids, but this one in particular has a phenomenal group of friends. So nobody judged her. Nobody made fun of her. They were like, oh man, we thought you were going to get it. It was kind of like a disappointment. And she said, my parents aren't ready, but they're working through it. And we're trying to figure out what we need to do to be comfortable having it. And that was fine. 6 months later, we worked it out. We were comfortable with it. And it helps that her friend's father is a police officer. And I was like, you can only have it if you friend him. And then he can see all your stuff, and then I'm good, right? But so giving them the words and saying, I'm not saying no just to be a mean mom. I'm not saying no because I don't trust you. Because that's immediately what our kids are going to think. You don't trust me.
Yes. And we don't want to put that in their minds, that we don't trust them. Right. So that's why the conversation is so important. And this question also kind of leads to this issue that we see, across the board when when they're different parenting styles, right? How do you navigate that? So your kid is friends with another kid, two different parenting styles, or maybe you and your friend have two different parenting styles. That's a hard one in the parent world to navigate. So tell me your thoughts on that first.
I have a feeling
You and I don't, so it makes life easier.
Exactly. Very similar parenting styles. From a very early age, unapologetic. We are unapologetic about our parenting style, but we're also non-judgmental about other people's parenting style. And so, I mean, I feel like I'm a broken record. We talk to our kids. So whether it was when they were 3, 4, and 6, and we would go to a play date, and other kids' parents would perhaps be a little loosey-goosey, or perhaps not parent in the way I parent. And in the car, or when we got home, it would be like, Mom, why did, Johnny's mom XYZ? The 3 things my husband and I both would always teach our kids, and I talk to clients about this in practice, is if we pass judgment on somebody else in front of our kids, we're teaching our kids it's okay to be critical. It's okay to be judgmental. So I'm not here to judge Miss Niro on how she parents, but this is how we parent. So we are going to be kind, but this is the boundary we've set. This is the boundary.
That's really good. Yeah, and that part of that is modeling too. And this would be really controversial, but I've always wanted to do a talk that was called Mean Girls, Mean Moms, because there's a lot of learned behavior, and we hear about it all the time, especially, in session with 40-something-year-old women dealing with the same issues that these teenagers deal with. I mean, my kids, it's funny because I was raised by immigrants, my husband was, and Natalia now, often she'll be like, all the white moms are letting their kids do this. All the white moms, and I'll be like, I'm sorry, like, is there a white mom in this house? And first of all, it's like her joke, right? But that's not true, because whether you're white or whatever, it's Sri Lankan or Indian, whatever, we all have similar parenting styles at different times. Okay, Steph Cohen, maybe I'll do that, the talk. But find moms who parent like you. It's important that you have those mom allies.
Mhm.
And also, if you can find moms who, even one or two, who have similar rules for their kids, who your kids know, that is always something to keep in your back pocket and say, no, I know that your friends are doing this, but this is your friend, and her mom and I are very similar on that.
Mhm.
That is such an asset for a mom, such a so important, because what happens is that child starts to feel alone. You
Yes.
know, I am alone. No one is like me. Everybody else is going to do this, and I'm going to get left out. So it's important that you kind of bring their attention to, no, you're not the only one. There are other parents who also do this. Here are some.
Mhm.
And in our case, Natalia has an Indian friend, and I know her Indian mom is a lot, a lot like me, and 10 times out of 10, I'm like, is your daughter doing this? Okay, me either. Bye.
Right.
And then she's good with it as long as she knows there's someone else in a similar situation. We dealt with that issue with going to gatherings and parties during COVID.
Yes.
So, it comes up at different times. Yeah, finding like-minded parent friends is key. It really is, and it's your support system, and it helps to reassure your kid that they're not alone. Anything more to say about that, Carrie?
No, well, only just to take stock, moms and dads and caregivers who are watching, reflect on your reaction, because we are modeling, whether we think we are or not, we're modeling for our kids. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 before we say anything. It's so important. It's so important. And finding like-minded friends. And Dora, I have a sister.
Parents.
Yes. It's so important, because there are going to be times, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we want the lines of communication to be open, where our kids don't like us, right? Where they don't want to talk to us. And one of the things we established a few years ago, right around the time when I wasn't the most popular mom in this house, was it's okay. Like, this is developmentally appropriate, where you don't want to talk to me about stuff, or where, just looking at me probably annoys you. I get that. But here are the 3 or 4 women to my daughters you
Yep.
can talk to, because they share our value system. Niro, you're one of them. They share our
Good.
value system. They parent similarly, and they don't have to tell me what you talk to them about. But if you
Yeah.
need a sounding board, a sound adult voice, and you don't feel like you can talk to me, you can go to Miss Niro, you can go to Miss Allison, you can go to, and I gave them the list, and they've used it. One of my daughters has used that and said, I just didn't feel like I could talk to you because you're a therapist. So the curse.
I
So I
know.
went to X, and that is really helpful. So if we can find like-minded parents who we can lock arms with and walk this journey together, it really is helpful.
It makes a huge difference. And forgive me for saying moms all the time, because I'm just talking about my own experience, but dads,
Yes.
parents, there are a lot of dads out there who are single parents or are shared custody and do a lot of the parenting as well. So finding like-minded parents. I talked a little bit on my live about when your kids are outgrowing some of their friendships, but maybe as a parent, you want them to be friends with that child, or maybe the other parent wants to continue that friendship and you feel like it's no longer the right friendship for your child. How do you navigate that, Carrie Amos?
Carrie Amos.
I talked about how I did already on my profile.
This came up in one of my sessions today.
Oh, did it really?
Yes, and just
Do
talking
tell.
through a mom of a few younger, under the age of 10 kids, and one of their kids is getting ready to have a birthday party and said, I don't want to invite this kid. And the mom was like, well, wait, no, like, we always invite that kid. Like, all right, you know what? Invite that kid this year. It's too soon to cancel. And next year, like, we'll take the next year and you'll grow apart. And that was this mom's process. And I, okay, that's your process. But what I asked her was, is this more about you and that mom, or is it more about the fact that your kid just doesn't, maybe he's drifting away from their friend? And so, back to what I said earlier, be a good listener. Be a good listener.
Mm.
Be a good listener. Why doesn't your kid want to invite this other child to the party? Did something happen? At the age that this child is, it's likely that something happened and now I hate you for the rest of my life, but it was, you know, you didn't share your toys at the playground, perhaps. I don't know. But what is it? Or are you just growing apart? Are you, you know, we have really good family friends where they have kids the same age as our kids and we've spent holidays together and whatnot, but the kids aren't besties anymore. But that's okay. They can still be family friends and we don't
Yep.
have to see each other every weekend. So be a good listener. The second thing I would say is take what your kids are saying seriously. So instead of poo-pooing like, oh, no, it's okay. Like, we're going to invite them to the party, or no, you and she have been friends for forever. No,
Right.
it's fine.
Right.
Take what they're saying seriously. Because if we don't take what our kids are saying seriously, they're going to stop sharing with us. And we don't want that.
Absolutely.
We don't
And
want that.
we want to help them discern who would be a good friend to them.
Right.
So having that conversation is really important and supporting them
Mm-hmm.
in that decision. Now, on the flip side, what if they start becoming friends with people who are not good influences?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
That is.
And depending on the age, it's also different because we definitely have more control over the time
Mhm.
they spend with people when they're younger. But how do you navigate that as they get older?
Well, I'm at the age that my kids are at right now. I'm in the thick of that, and I am thankful that it seems like they all have chosen good friends. But I'm a question asker. You know, what do you like about him or her? Is it you have this sports team in common or this dance team in common? What is it? What does this friend bring out the best in you, or does this friend? Why is it that you came home crying?
Mm,
Friends aren't perfect, but friends don't hurt. So
hmm
what is it about this person? And so I ask questions, and not to the point of my kids getting annoyed at me, but just help me understand. This is a new friend in your life. She seems totally different from all of the other friends you've been connecting with. What is it? What drew you to her or him?
hmm
And asking questions, but also, and this is really hard, allowing your kids to pick the friends they want to pick. And sometimes that means they might get hurt. Sometimes that
mm,
sometimes that means they may pick the wrong friend.
hmm
And we can walk alongside of them, we can support them, but if we put that bubble around them, we're just moving the goalpost. We're just kicking the
Yeah.
can. We're not teaching them how to discern relationships and navigate relationships.
And like it does differ depending on it changes depending on the age of the child. Certainly the way you'd handle that with a 16-year-old is different than a 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, some of the situations are hard. What if they're hanging out with people who are heavily into substances and those kind of things? And then I think there are some boundaries that need to be set.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain age there's only so much control you have, but you want to keep those lines of communication open. And I like how you said that there are times where you were not the favorite mom in the house. Like as moms, as parents, as dads, we're not going to be. It's actually not our job to be their friend right now.
Right.
We hope that can happen later, but honestly, the parents who really become friends later on with their children and have these great relationships have set pretty clear boundaries with their kids early on, especially in that 12, 13, 14 age group. By
Mm-hmm.
15 and 16, it is hard to set boundaries with your kids. That foundation has to be laid early.
Yes. Yes. So being that you have two kids that are younger,
Mm,
one of the questions that I received was from the mom, and she's made a few comments on here, of a 7-year-old
mm,
asking, when you know your child has not so great friends that are
hmm
excluding her, how
Yeah.
do you help her navigate those friendships and realize it may be time to make new friends?
Oh, so we just went through this a little bit older, and not that they're bad friends. And I it's important not to label kids as bad, good, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And just take note of Melly's question there. What if you see bad influence coming from friends? What's the best way to bring that up? But this is kind of similar. It's very similar. Um, You know, we have had to have talks both with two of my girls already. What is a good friend? You know, what is a good friend? And what do you want in a friendship? Are you seeing that in this group of girls? You
Mm-hmm.
know, how do you feel when you're with them?
Mm-hmm.
And and then we looked at who else, what other friendships can we nurture? Because at 7, 8, 9, 10, you as a parent can still facilitate your child coming together with other kids, play dates, you know, get together as families, you know, encourage other connections. And more likely than not, if there's a group doing this, there are other kids who are feeling that way too.
Mm,
And it's important to connect with those kids and show that child that their, you know, relationships change, friendships change, especially at this age. It's very normal. You might have different friends every year. And we have to just get used to and learn to make friends.
right.
It's hard when your child feels left out, when there are mean things done to your child, and we're going to talk about that next. Um, but I think one, you want to listen, you want to empathize. I'm so sorry you're going through that. I'm sure that's really hard. Can you tell me more about what you're feeling? Um, and assure them that that's normal. You want to normalize that feeling. It's actually, this happens to a lot of girls at your age, and it's really normal to feel that way. But let's talk about it more. And let's think about other friends that maybe we want to start spending a little bit more time with. There are points where it gets bad enough to bring it to the attention of a teacher. If if there are intentionally mean things happening in the classroom, and we can talk a little bit about when, you know, when we draw that line, because I would say you don't want to run to the teacher every time something like that is happening,
Right.
but there are situations where it really just, it becomes really harmful.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
um,
That's good.
that's what I would say, and get used to that conversation, because and I hate to say it around girls because boys also navigate this, but it's super common with girls and at a younger age. You know, that's why there's a musical about Mean Girls, you know,
Mm-hmm.
based on that book, by the way. Okay, so let's just talk about friend drama, you know, and one day we will do that talk about friend drama, no matter how old you are,
That's
because
it. That's
people have it at all ages. But the one thing I want to say about friend drama, don't think your child is above being the person causing the drama, because at these developmental stages, every child, depending on the situation they're in, has the potential to hurt another child,
mm-hmm.
to cause drama. And it may, you may see a different side of your child at home. I've seen kids who are seamless in terms of the what they tell the parent, and the behavior becomes very different at school,
Mm-hmm.
so, or other parents. And I've seen this for years, you know, in practice. So this book really talks about the different types of parenting, and I just pulled out an excerpt because it was so good. They talk about the different types of parents when your child is in a situation, and one was the believer parent. You believe everything your child tells you, like you were there, you know, watching it, everything. There's no question that your child is not right in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think as therapists, you know, even when we're working with a client, we're aware that, okay, this is that client's perspective.
Right.
And there could be other sides to that story. We're trained to think like that. It's harder with your child, but it's so advantageous if we can get to that space. And what she says is, she gave this example of a child coming home saying that this person yelled at her. And the parent automatically is like, oh, that teacher yelled at you, whatever. And she's saying, think about when your child has accused you of yelling at them when you haven't. But we don't think about that. So what she suggests is not that the child isn't telling the truth, but if we don't consider the possibility of other perspectives, she says three things are going to happen. You won't find out what's really going on. When you find out that there's another side to the story, you may get embarrassed because your child has made you look like a fool. And three, your embarrassment turns into massive denial and defensiveness. And I feel like we've all, at some point, by the time your child is in high school, you would have come across the defensive parent,
Yep.
you know, when you're bringing a situation up or maybe even talking about it. So your thoughts, Carrie, because you have two daughters, you have a son, on navigating these tough friend conflicts between kids.
Mm-hmm. I'm laughing because while I've seen that parent and I've worked with that parent. I'm so far away from that parent. I'm the parent that's like, what did they do? What, like feeding my own kids? You know, I'm always thinking like, what'd she do? What did he do?
This is the ethnic mom, I swear, right? I
Yep.
mean, yeah.
But just in what you read about, you know, always believing and you know, kind of putting the veil that not my kid couldn't. What that does is it then makes the situation more about you than the kid. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's more about, well, I couldn't possibly have raised a kid that would lie. I could not possibly have raised a kid who would be the mean kid. And all of a sudden, the focus is coming off of your child and onto you. And then it becomes all about you. So
Mm.
it's time to pivot, parents, and say, how are we raising kids? It is possible and likely that at some point in time, one of our kids will be the mean kid. You know, hopefully not, but it is very possible.
And
Um,
maybe not the bully, but someone who sent the text that was unkind or mean that created a situation.
right.
I mean, there are a lot of kids that even good, a lot of situations where good kids can instigate situations.
The
And
big
it's,
G word, right? Gossip. Mean
mm-hmm.
stuff is going on and you don't think you're perpetuating it, but you're like, oh my gosh, to the girl who doesn't know anything, did you hear what was going on with those two? And just talking about it
And
perpetuates
just,
it.
and another thing to know about when kids have phones, they screenshot texts and send it to other people.
Yes.
So, and that happens so young and creates more of this.
Mm-hmm.
So, just something to kind of have that conversation with your child. She also goes on to talk about other parents. I'm not going to, other types of parents. The you mess with my kid, you mess with me parent, like the mama bear parent.
Mm-hmm.
These are the parents that you're kind of reluctant to have a conversation with because you think that nothing's going to change and they're not going to be open to it. Let them work it out parent. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they step out of it. And that's, you know, I think there's a point where there's some truth in that. But there comes a point where kids are struggling and they're trying to navigate these situations. And yes, we can have conversations at home with them. But if this is a prolonged situation, parents may have to get involved and have an adult conversation with another parent to at least say, how can we help these kids? You know, what is going on? Am I getting the whole story?
Mm-hmm.
I always come at it, you know, always, like it happens all the time, but like, you know, when I have come at it, it's always been like, I want to make sure that I'm getting an accurate story of my daughter's behavior.
Right.
You know, have you heard of things that she's done that has hurt your child?
Mm-hmm.
Because that automatically can kind of bring down some of the defenses. And even if I know that maybe the other child is more at fault here, I will always come out of it initiated, trying to own what I can own first,
Right.
or opening up the door of possibility to that.
Mm-hmm.
A pushover parent, no boundaries, and the benign neglect parent, which is just two parents who are too tired and exhausted to get involved, which I think is many of us on many days. But then there's like that no excuses parent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the rules she talks about. This is how you behave. It's difficult because when that child can't live up to that, whatever it might be, it creates shame in that child. And like you said, you can prevent them. They might not want to come to you and share
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if Carrie, Carrie, can you answer this? At what point do you actually go to the other parent instead of letting the kids work it out?
I think it depends on the situation and it depends
Mm-hmm.
on what the drama is between relationships. But I would say if there have been 2 or 3 attempts of you working with your child on role playing and giving them the words to say, and it continues to cycle, and they feel like they're lacking hope in the situation, then it's time to, I would say, for another intervention, going to the other parents. If it's related to school, going to the school. But to back up, I would say regardless of if our child comes to us and feels like the victim or we have reason to think that they are the perpetrator, we as parents need to respond, again, listening, but reflective listening. Because sometimes kids at this age, brains aren't fully developed, hormones are raging, They say what they think. They don't say, or they don't say the reality of what happened. They say what they think the reality is. So if you reflect that back, what I'm hearing you say is, little Sally Smith, didn't play with you today, or posted something that you snapped, or whatever the situation is. No, Mom, that's not what I said. I just said she gave me the stank face. Oh, so she gave you a dirty look. That's very different.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different. Okay, so we respond with reflective listening. But then, because I could be very quick to say, oh, is that all? No, validate their feelings. It is so okay to feel hurt, angry,
Yeah.
dismissed, pissed off, like whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But my mantra in therapy with kids and adults alike is feel your feelings and hold them, and let's figure out why you're feeling. Let's get underneath that feeling. But then it's time to choose your behavior. Are we going to behave out of
Yes.
anger? Are we going to behave out of fear? Or are we going to choose the right behavior? But we first have to understand how we're feeling. So listen reflectively. Reflect back what you think you're hearing your kids say. Articulate that. That could take a week.
Yeah.
Validate. So how are you feeling with how she treated you? Validate. Is it, I'm pissed off. What does that mean? You're angry? You're scared? You're afraid you're going to be alone? You're like, what do you feel? And work through that. And then, okay, let's choose the right behavior. How can we behave?
I like how you said when your child is kind of losing hope in that situation as
Mm-hmm.
well, it may be time to go to the other parent. I mean, I've gone to other parents when it's gotten nasty,
Mm-hmm.
when it's kind of above their age group, developmental level to handle,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a confrontational way. Hopefully, I think I can be naturally confrontational, which I don't like to be, but I try not to. And also if I've noticed that my child has done something, I want to go to the other parent and talk it out. I will empower the child to do it first,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but say the other mom is a friend of mine, and that also crosses into other territory. When you're friends with that mom and there's stuff going on between your kids,
Yeah.
there are moms who say, why don't you come to me, like we're friends? We should be able to talk about it. But then there are other friends, you go to them and all of a sudden you're not so friendly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough line for parents to navigate, but you have to kind of think about your situation and what's really going to bring peace to this situation,
Right.
right?
Right.
What's going to bring peace? And that's going to be different depending on the relationship, both your relationship with that other parent and between the kids,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And
There.
it can
Mhm.
be sticky. Friendships
Very.
between parents could change, and maybe you lose a friend, or maybe, it can get very, very sticky. But don't let that
Yeah.
deter you from helping your child find their voice, use their voice,
Mhm.
and advocate appropriately.
And going back to that question, like you said, even though that parent might be your friend, it's not about you at this point. I mean, it might be, but what's in the best interest of the child right now?
Right.
We're grown adults, yes, and we don't want to lose a friend, but if we have an adult relationship, we shouldn't, right? So maybe we won't be as close or spend time together as families, but what's in the best interest of the child? There was one thing in this book, and this book again was Queen Bee's Wannabes. Because I've said this to my children, and when I read this in the book, I said, all right, well, maybe I need to rethink some of the responses. What should you say when your child tells you someone's being mean to them? She says things not to say, and the first thing she writes about, she's jealous of you, she's insecure. I mean, many of us have said that because we know that that is an underlying issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or there is an insecurity or whatever it is. But she says, even if it's true, that doesn't stop the other kid from making her miserable. There's nothing the child can really do with that information. And you never want a girl telling other girls they are jealous of her, because that will be seen as a declaration of war, which which is smart. And she says, like we've said, your go-to response is a combination of, I'm so sorry. Thank you for telling me. I'm going to help you think this through so you can come up with a plan so that you feel a little more in control,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was just a great response, because they're feeling out of control. They're feeling overwhelmed.
And that response takes the action away from the other girl and onto your
Yes.
child. We don't know what's
I
going
love
on in the
that.
mind of the child. This is about my relationship with my child. How can I empower you to feel a little bit more in control?
Yeah, I love it. One quick last question because we're almost at the hour.
Wow.
Should I, and we can do a whole other, podcast or talk or other things coming up,
Other
Carrie, that
things,
we will talk
other
about
things may be coming.
um, on this topic in more detail specifically. But there was one question: should I let my kids play at houses of people I don't know very well? Um, one depends on the age of the kid,
Mm-hmm.
and also you need to have some conversations with your older kids who may be navigating that situation. When they're younger, get to know the families,
Yep.
get to know the parents, find out who's in the home, find out siblings in the house. We can tell you as therapists, there are certain situations that lead to lifetime trauma
That's right.
that are just not worth the risk if you don't have to take it. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say get to know the child and the family and invite them to your house first. Get to know the family before you send them out. I would just want to answer that quickly. Any other thoughts about that?
No, amen.
Yeah.
I would say exactly the same
Okay.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Carrie, thank you so much for joining and spending the time. And I love having these conversations with you. And we're also trying to navigate the situations with our kids as they're happening. And we may not be doing the right thing all the time. Hopefully. And I think the other thing it's important, especially as your kids get older, is let them know you're fallible. You're not perfect. You're trying to figure this out together. You're trying to figure out what's best for them. Apologize when we need to apologize, when we're
Yes.
reactive. Apologies go such a long way with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to know that it's okay for them to make mistakes too.
Yes.
And if we can model how to make a mistake and recover from it and apologize from it and move on, I mean, that's one of the best gifts you can give your kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am forever apologizing, and saying I'm still, particularly with my oldest, because she's my oldest. I've never done this before. This is a new season. Let's work on this together. And as recently as this morning, she said, as long as we can always have the lines of communication open, Mom, I get it. Score,
Mm.
win, yes. Celebrate the milestones. Yes, we want to communicate. So give yourself some grace, show yourself some grace, listen reflectively. And when you draw your boundaries, make sure they're in sand, not cement, because we may need to move them depending on the situation.
And you're not the only person that's made the mistake that you've made. As therapists, we've probably made them too.
Yes.
And we went to school for this. So give yourself some grace. I love that. I love that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to post it on my profile. And yes, I will link the books in the notes if I technologically can figure out how to do that, which I will try. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.